growing the new economy for Oldham is crucial, actually, and so it means a number of things. It absolutely means what Neil was saying in terms of the importance of the social. I think we've seen more than a decade, but at least the last decade, where the investment has gone on physical infrastructure, very, very much at the expense of social infrastructure. And the consequences of that, I think, are going to be with us for many decades to come. So the growing emphasis is about growing those social connections and the relational aspects of an economy. So we can look at it from a very cold kind of system and supply chain aspects, but we all too often forget about the people dynamics of that. And how do we strengthen relationships? How do we grow those interconnections? And how do we think all the time about the deep, intimate connections between system, place and organisations? So we've had a very strong ethos at Oldham Council and the broader kind of team Oldham about we're not just in Oldham, we're of Oldham. The people that we employ, the majority of them live in Oldham, and over 90% live in Greater Manchester, so over 3/4 live in Oldham. So what's our responsibility, not just as an employer and being a good employer, but in terms of the stewardship of place and in that community leadership role? So it's led us to some really deep thinking, supported very much by Claire's, about how the way that we work, so not just what we do, but the way that we do it, and how does that contribute to thriving communities in their broadest sense. So the responsibility we have for the well-being of our workforce, so we invest quite heavily in what we call Fit for Oldham, which is about thinking about if we can improve the kind of competence and confidence in people looking after their own well-being that work for us, they're also people in the community, and there's a spreading effect. So we're always thinking about the kind of the rippling effect. And I think the other key lesson from us from history is that over-reliance on one sector or one type of employment leaves you incredibly vulnerable when change happens. So we've seen that in waves actually in a place like Oldham, really strong reliance on the mills and the manufacturing sector, and even though we still have actually a very strong high-end manufacturing sector, we can just see that how rapidly things change. Then a reliance on the public sector, and then a reliance on the retail sector, all of which have seen really strong shifts. So actually we need much more plurality in our economy and much greater diversity. So, and then the increasing emphasis on issues such as sustainability and climate change, thinking very deeply about the economic consequences is important of how we work, but what are the global impacts, what are the impacts on our environment about the way that we work? Refer back to my comment about commuting earlier on, so maybe I should have caught the train. So, but that kind of infrastructure is really important as well, and the way that that's been developed has been driven by such a city-centric ethos. So it is relatively easy to get from Oldham to Manchester. It's really hard actually on public transport to get from Oldham to Tameside or the orbital links, because a policy that thinks about really heavy investment in high productivity, high end in city centres, hasn't then rippled out. I'm sure, I miss Neil, but I'm sure Neil would have made this point because he's made it very eloquently before. What impact has that had on places? And the tropes that we have in terms of things like trickle down are lazy, I think, and they haven't thought about the real deep understanding of lived experience. And so for us, there's something also about the skills and how we're educating our future workforce. And that's not just people at school, that's people in work already, thinking about their next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. What is the education offer? How do we support people to make the shift from a very, very traditional model that we've had with us for a long time? We had our staff awards last week, and we celebrated 5 staff that have done over 40 years with Oldham Council. We have a lot of people that have worked for us for a very long time. That isn't the future model of work. So what do we do in terms of education and our skills development to prepare people for the dramatic shifts that have always been with us, but are accelerating deeply? So I think in Oldham we've been exploring a lot of these issues for some considerable time now. There isn't a single answer, there isn't an easy answer, but it does require that deep kind of collective responsibility for this, and actually for all of us to do our bit and to really shift the mindset about what's possible, certainly about what's possible for a place like Oldham, and not be limited by stereotypes or by history, but absolutely use that as a foundation to build the future on. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.